Bolin stood and walked to the window, staring at the first light of dawn breaking over the city. The weight of the empire, his family's legacy, and the lives of those he loved pressed heavily on his shoulders. "If I do this," he said, his voice steady, "it's not for me. It's for them. For my parents." Ming nodded, his expression resolute. "Then we start planning. If we're going to do this, we do it right." As Bolin turned back to face him, a new fire burned in his eyes. If they want a king, they'll get one, but on my terms. The room was quiet as Bolin sat across from Jiwan at an ornate lacquered table, the tension between them palpable. Jiwan, a man of sharp features and sharper cunning, sipped his tea with a faint smirk, his piercing eyes studying Bolin like a predator sizing up its prey. "You've caused quite a stir, Bolin," Jiwan said, setting his cup down. "A young man fighting to reclaim what was never his to begin with? Admirable, if misguided." Bolin remained calm, his face a mask of detachment. "I'm not here to fight you, Mr. Wei. I'm here to propose a solution." Jiwan raised an eyebrow. "A solution? Do tell." Bolin's voice was steady, his tone carefully measured. "Your daughter, Wei Lian. A union between our families would end this conflict. It would secure your position and eliminate me as a threat." Jiwan's smirk widened, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "And why would I trust a man who has spent months trying to undo everything I've built?" "Because I know when I'm beaten," Bolin lied, leaning forward, "and because you and I both know that an alliance is far more valuable than a war." Jiwan's gaze lingered on Bolin, assessing him. Then, with a slow nod, he said, "Very well. Let's see if you're as clever as you think you are." Behind closed doors, the negotiations began. Ming and a small team of loyalists worked tirelessly to ensure the plan's success. They crafted contracts, outlined terms, and carefully orchestrated every detail of the marriage to avoid suspicion. Wei Lian, however, was not easily convinced. When Bolin met her for the first time, she greeted him with a cool, calculating stare. "So, you're the man who thinks he can buy peace with a wedding," she said, her voice laced with skepticism. Bolin held her gaze, his expression unreadable. "And you're the woman who's about to make her father invincible." Lian arched an eyebrow, a faint smile playing on her lips, bold words for a man with nothing left to lose. The wedding was a spectacle, unlike anything Bolin had ever imagined. Jiwan spared no expense, ensuring the event was not only a celebration, but a declaration of his dominance. The grand ballroom was filled with chandeliers dripping with crystals, silk banners bearing the Wei family crest, and a sea of powerful figures, many of whom Bolin knew were part of the Shadow Circle. As Bolin stood at the altar, dressed in an immaculate black suit, he scanned the crowd. Each face was a reminder of the empire that had been stolen from him. Each smiles, a thinly veiled taunt. His stomach churned, but he forced himself to remain composed. When Wei Lian entered, the room fell silent. She wore a gown of shimmering gold, her every step commanding attention. Her expression was as composed as Bolin's, but her eyes flicked toward him with a hint of curiosity. As the ceremony proceeded, Bolin recited the vows he had memorized, each word feeling like a betrayal of Marina and the life they had dreamed of. But he kept his focus, knowing that this was the first step in reclaiming what was his. "Do you, Wei Lian, take Hao Bolin to be your husband?" the officiant asked. Lian's voice was clear and steady. "I do." "And do you, Hao Bolin, take Wei Lian to be your wife?" Bolin hesitated for the briefest moment, his mind flashing to Marina. Then, swallowing his guilt, he said, "I do." As they exchanged rings and the room erupted into applause, Bolin's resolve hardened. This wasn't just a marriage, it was a declaration of war. The reception was a glittering affair, with Jiwan playing the role of the gracious host. As Bolin moved through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with men and women who had betrayed his family, he felt the weight of their scrutiny. They saw him as defeated, a man brought to heel by the might of the shadow circle. But beneath Bolin's polite facade was a sharp mind, observing, calculating. Each conversation revealed a thread, a potential weakness in the web of alliances Jiwan had spun. Ming, stationed discreetly at the edges of the room, caught Bolin's eye and gave a subtle nod, signaling that the first phase of their plan was complete. At the center of it all was Wei Lian, poised and enigmatic. As the evening wore on, she approached Bolin, a glass of champagne in her hand. "You're good at this," she said, her tone neutral. "Pretending you belong." Bolin raised an eyebrow. "And you're good at pretending you don't notice." Lian smirked, taking a sip of her drink. "Just remember, Bolin, you may have won my father's favor, but you haven't won mine." "I wouldn't expect to," Bolin replied, his voice low, "but I didn't marry you for love." Lian's eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing, turning and disappearing into the crowd. As the night wore on, Bolin felt the weight of his decision more acutely. Ming pulled him aside, his expression grim. "You played your part well tonight, but this is just the beginning. Jiwan isn't stupid. If he catches even a hint of what we're planning—" "He won't," Bolin interrupted. "Not until it's too late." Ming nodded, though his concern remained evident. "Just remember what's at stake. This isn't just about you anymore." Bolin glanced around the room, his gaze settling on Lian, who stood beside her father, laughing at some private joke. The image burned in his mind, a reminder of the delicate balance he was walking. He was surrounded by enemies, bound by a marriage that was both a shield and a noose. But as Bolin raised a glass to toast with the shadow circle, his smile masked the fire burning within. The game had begun, and he was ready to play. Days turned into weeks, and Bolin's life as Wei Lian's husband became a delicate dance between pretense and purpose. By day, he was the attentive spouse, accompanying Lian to public events, engaging in polite conversation with her father's inner circle, and playing the role of a man humbled by his new alliance. By night, he was a strategist, meeting with Ming and their trusted operatives in secret, weaving together the threads of a plan that could reclaim his empire or cost him his life. At every moment, Bolin felt the strain of his double life. A single slip, a wrong word, or a misplaced look could unravel everything. The weight of Marina pressed heavily on him, fueling his determination, but also amplifying his guilt. He couldn't let himself think of her too often. It was too dangerous, too distracting. But in the quiet moments, when the walls seemed to close in, her image would flash before him, grounding him in the reason for his sacrifices. Wei Lian was no fool. From the moment Bolin had walked into her life, she had been wary of his motives. Her father's enemies had always been men of ambition, but Bolin was different. He didn't reek of desperation or arrogance. He was calm, calculated, too perfect. It unnerved her. One evening, as they sat across from each other at dinner, she studied him carefully. Bolin had just finished recounting a story about his childhood, an anecdote designed to disarm her. But Lian caught the faintest hesitation in his tone. "You're a good storyteller," she said, setting down her glass of wine, "but I've learned that the best stories are the ones people don't tell." Bolin smiled, his expression unreadable. "And what story do you think I'm hiding?" Lian leaned back in her chair, her eyes sharp. "The one where you explain why a man like you would marry a woman like me. Is it love, convenience, or something else?" Bolin's grip on his fork tightened imperceptibly, but he kept his voice steady. "You underestimate yourself, Lian. A marriage like ours has the power to change the future. For both of us. For both of us, she echoed, her smile faint but knowing. Perhaps. But power always comes at a price, doesn't it? Later that night, Bolin slipped out of their lavish bedroom while Lian slept. Or so he thought. In the shadows of the estate, he met with Ming and two other operatives in a hidden room deep beneath the house. The network is expanding, Ming reported, spreading a map on the table. We've recruited 3 more allies inside Jiwan's logistics division. They're feeding us intel on his shipment routes. Bolin nodded, his mind already working through the implications. Good. If we can intercept those shipments without drawing suspicion, we'll disrupt his cash flow. That's the lifeblood of his operation. One of the operatives, a wiry man named Qiang, spoke up. But we're running out of time. Jiwan's moving faster than we anticipated. If he consolidates his power any further, it'll be impossible to— Then we won't let him, Bolin interrupted, his voice cold and resolute. Whatever it takes, we'll stop him. The meeting lasted an hour, every moment filled with quiet urgency. As they prepared to disperse, Ming placed a hand on Bolin's shoulder. Be careful, he said. Lian's sharp. If she suspects— She already does, Bolin admitted, his expression darkening. But she doesn't have proof. Not yet. Unbeknownst to Bolin, Lian wasn't asleep when he left the room. She had followed him through the winding halls of the estate, her steps silent as a shadow. From the top of a staircase, she watched as he disappeared into the hidden room, the faint murmur of voices drifting up to her. Lian's heart pounded as suspicion turned to certainty. Bolin wasn't just playing the part of the dutiful husband. He was plotting something far more dangerous. But what? And why? She didn't know whether to confront him or keep her discovery to herself. For now, she decided to wait and watch. The truth would reveal itself soon enough. Over the following weeks, Bolin and Ming's team began to execute their plan with precision. Using the information Bolin gleaned from his position beside Jiwan, they sabotaged key operations. A shipment of illegal arms disappeared en route to its destination. A critical meeting between Jiwan and a foreign investor was disrupted by an anonymous tip to the authorities. Each move was a small but calculated blow to Jiwan's empire. Lian noticed the changes. Her father's frustration grew, his once unshakable confidence beginning to crack. She observed Bolin closely, looking for signs that he was involved, but he was careful, too careful. One evening, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the city, Lian broke the silence. My father's been agitated lately, she said, her tone casual but probing. Bolin turned to her, his expression calm. Running an empire isn't easy. Even the best have their moments of weakness. True, Lian said, her gaze fixed on the horizon. But sometimes weakness comes from within. Bolin met her gaze, his heart racing. What are you trying to say? Lian smiled faintly, a glint of steel in her eyes. Just an observation, husband, nothing more. As the weeks went on, Bolin's double life began to take its toll. The lies he told Lian, the secrets he kept, and the danger he put Ming and his operatives in weighed heavily on him. But the thought of his parent and Marina kept him moving forward. One night, as he lay awake in bed, Lian's voice broke the silence. Do you ever regret this? She asked, her tone unreadable. Bolin turned to her, his breath catching. Regret what? This marriage, she said. The choices that brought us here. Did you ever wonder if things could have been different? For a moment, Bolin considered telling her the truth. That his heart belonged to someone else. That every moment in this house was a calculated risk. But he couldn't. The stakes were too high. Every choice we make leads us somewhere, he said finally. We just have to hope it's worth it. Lian studied him for a long moment, her expression impossible to read. I hope so too, she said softly, before turning away. As Bolin's plans began to bear fruit, the tension between him and Lian grew. She was no longer content to observe from the sidelines. She began to probe, to test him, to search for cracks in the facade he had so carefully constructed. Bolin knew it was only a matter of time before she uncovered the truth. And when she did, the question wasn't whether she would expose him, but whether she would choose to help him or destroy him. In Lagos, the days bled into weeks, and the weeks stretched into months. Marina's once fierce optimism began to wane, replaced by a gnawing worry she couldn't shake. Bolin's promises echoed in her mind, but the silence that followed them was deafening. Ming, who had always been a steady presence, hadn't visited in months. The absence of updates, of any connection to Bolin, felt like a void swallowing her whole. Marina poured her energy into caring for her son, Hao Chao. His tiny laugh, his curious eyes, and his soft coos were her anchor in a sea of uncertainty. She kept a journal for him, writing letters he couldn't yet read. In the quiet of the night, she would whisper stories of his father, painting Bolin as a hero fighting for a better future for them all. But as much as she tried to convince herself of that truth, doubt began to creep in. Was Bolin even alive? Had he forgotten about her? The thought gnawed at her, and no amount of rationalization could make it go away. When the knock came at the door one humid afternoon, Marina's heart leaped. For a fleeting moment, she thought it might be Bolin. She rushed to the door, only to find Ming standing there, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and relief. "Ming," she breathed, her emotions flooding to the surface. "Where have you been? What's happening? Is Bolin—" "He's alive," Ming interrupted gently, stepping inside. "But it's complicated." The sight of Hao Chao stopped him in his tracks. The baby was napping peacefully in a bassinet, his tiny hand gripping a corner of the blanket. Ming's usually composed demeanor cracked as he crouched beside the bassinet, his eyes glistening with emotion. "He's beautiful," Ming said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Bolin would be so proud." Marina crossed her arms, her relief quickly turning to frustration. "Then why doesn't he know? Why haven't you told him?" Ming stood, the weight of his decisions etched into his features. "Marina, it's not that simple. If Bolin finds out about the baby, he'll come here. No matter how dangerous it is, he'll come. And if he does, he'll lead the shadow circle straight to you." Marina's lips pressed into a thin line as she fought back tears. "So I'm just supposed to keep pretending he doesn't exist? That we don't exist?" "I know it's not fair," Ming said, his voice heavy with guilt. "But keeping you both safe is the only thing Bolin would want right now. He's fighting for all of us, Marina, for his legacy, for the chance to give you and Hao Chao a future." Marina turned away, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. "I just don't understand why it has to be this way." Ming hesitated, torn between his loyalty to Bolin and his growing guilt over the secrets he carried. There was something else Marina didn't know, something that had been eating away at him since the day of Bolin's marriage.